a shame. So anyway, we are going to be at the MUFON Symposium on the 26th through the 28th, or the evening of the 28th. If someone wants to find out exactly when that show will be on YouTube Live, as I said, it won't be on KGRA, and it won't be on the regular podcast, but it will be an audio podcast for supporters. So if someone wants to find out when that's going to be live, what you're going to have to do is go to podcastufo.com, and over on the right-hand side, there is a newsletter you can sign up for. Now, your email is safe with me. It only goes into the MailChimp account, and that's encrypted, so no one's going to get to your email. I will not share your email. All that happens with that email is that you will get a newsletter for upcoming guests of the show, and that means every week. And if there's any other important announcement, I will make it on that. I do not abuse the email. I send it out normally one time a week, and that's to people that want to know what the upcoming show is. So again, our guest tonight is Nomar Slevik. Unfortunately, Alejandro did not make it, so he will be back next week, hopefully. And I think it's time, I think that's about all I have. I think it's time to bring in our guest. Nomar, welcome to the show.
Yo, what's going on, Martin?
How are you? So you're
Good,
up in, I don't know, the people on YouTube, I don't know if you want to see this, but I'm wearing my Maine Holy Mackerel shirt. I saved it for this special occasion for a Maine show. I couldn't find anything with moose or lobster. You know, that's what mostly people think of us up in Maine.
True.
I got to read your last book. I just got this book in the mail today. And so here it is, just showing it for the people on YouTube. And there it is. Okay, so anyway, I can't wait to read it. And I know that there's one story that is about the town that I grew up in Elliot, Maine. Now, I'm just going to throw some questions at you about the book itself. Did you actually interview that person in Elliot, Maine?
I did not.
You did not.
I could not get messages returned back to me.
Okay, but you did write it. Can you talk about that story in particular, what happened?
Yeah, well, there's actually 4 or 5 different stories in the Elliot chapter itself. So which one in particular of the Elliot stories are you referring to?
Oh, I thought there was only one. I'm sorry. So just go ahead and go into which one of them, because this is what I remember. And I know that the one story I had looked through briefly back a year ago.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that happened. That happened right after a few years after I left town. And the funny thing is about growing up in a small town is back in the 70s, when I was there, it's like everyone knew everyone else. So I'd be really surprised if I didn't know, who that was involved in these cases. But we did have a UFO flap. There was a lot of talk about UFO sightings back then.
There was.
Yeah. And I know that there was one hoax in particular that I know of. It was actually people on dirt bikes with some type of flashing lights. Got everyone all riled up. But yeah, if you can talk about that one in particular, go ahead if you would.
Yeah. I'll actually mention a couple of things, but first, I just want to say, anytime I correspond with you, Martin, either email or Facebook Messenger or something, in my head, I'm always saying, Ma Ann, like the, for Martin Lawrence sitcom.
Oh, yeah. So
I just thought you should know that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there was a really big flap in 1966, and Lauren Coleman was in communication with Betty Hill about all of this stuff, and Jerome Clark as well, about the flap of 66 that was going on. And apparently it would be multiple nights. You could almost set your clock by it. They would follow the river, And it got so congested at some point that police were called in to help manage traffic because so many people were going to watch the UFOs. Food carts were set up because there were so many people wanting to watch the UFOs. So that's pretty crazy. But fast forward about 10 years, I can't remember if it was 76, 78, something like that. There was a gentleman, and he was a teenager at the time, and him and his family were on the verge of moving to Alaska. He was literally spending the last night in his empty room in a sleeping bag, and all he had was a radio and a pillow and the sleeping bag, and that was it. So he's laying down, and he's got the radio on, local station, it's just playing music, and he sees something outside the window. And to him, from his perspective, it was about the height of his second-story window, but it was a ways away from him. And to him, it looked like a black coffin. Which is crazy. That's a crazy description, you know? So he gets up and he kneels up at the window and he's looking it over and he's studying it all. And then it just disappears on him. It takes off. So he's like, whoa, what the hell was that? You know? So he's thinking about it. And then he's like, well, I guess I'll lie back down. And lays back down, just gets comfortable, boom, sees it at his window again, and it's even closer. He thinks it's in his backyard, and it's hovering right about second-story window level for him. And so he, again, runs right to the window, kneels down, and he's looking at it, and he's studying everything. And he can see these little, almost instruments kind of poking out of it. And he can see that it's not really coffin-shaped. It's more like a cone with a dull end of it, if you will. And so he watched that for not too long. It was about 5 minutes or so. And it finally takes off, and he was just left with, you know, all this wonderment, like, what the hell was that? And so he lays back down, and the radio that was playing the music, the DJ comes on and says that he's starting to get calls about a UFO being seen in Elliot. And so he starts taking some calls from listeners, and this gentleman called in and told his story as well. And when he grew up, he got into aeronautics and really understood at that point, after he went through his schooling, that what he saw back as a teenager, in his opinion, was not of this world.
Wow. Do you remember what year that was exactly?
I can actually look it up for you. I'm pretty sure it was 76 or 78, but let me check it out.
Yeah, that's what I remember, was something like that, 78, I believe, from what I recall. But so let's, first of all, I know this is your second time on the show, but can you give, if you would, the listener, I know that you lived in Portland, Maine, you lived in Boston, but can you give the listener your background, basically? I know I should have asked for that first, but you know, what gets you interested also in the topic? And it's not just UFOs. You have a lot of different encounters that you actually bring out in this book. So
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
So a little bit about me. I've been a musician for the last 25 years. I'm on a record label out of Portland, Maine. It's called Mill Pavement Records. So shout out to Moshe and Brzezowski and all those guys, Mike Clouds. And I've been making music for a long, long time. And running parallel with that was also this fascination with the paranormal. And a lot of my friends tell me that I make exopolitics type music, you know, because it's really intertwined into my songs. But the reason I got into the paranormal, and I've been into it longer than making music, is an encounter I had at like 4 or 5 years old. I saw something that didn't make a whole lot of sense. It looked like a lightning bolt that was stuck in the clouds, and electricity was coming off of it. It was very weird, and there were loud booms. And during my research for the last book and this book, I've come across many cases where people have seen UFOs and heard booms associated with it. Not necessarily that they looked at the light and then instantly heard a boom, but there were booming sounds and a light was observed, you know. Doesn't mean it's extraterrestrial, no, but it's interesting to say the least, and I think garners some more research. But anyway, so a couple of months after having that sighting of whatever it was, in my young mind, I just thought it was a lightning bolt stuck in the clouds. But I knew that wasn't right. I knew that didn't make sense, and it kind of scared me. And a couple of months later, my mom and dad woke me and my sister up out of bed so we could go observe the Northern Lights. And it was quite the show that evening. It was crazy. And it was after that sighting of the Northern Lights that I knew, like, this world is friggin' weird, you know? And I was actually kind of scared. There were some other paranormal happenings that were going. I think my mom and dad's house in Fort Kent, Maine, where I grew up until about 4th grade. I'm pretty sure it was haunted, and whatever was there would bother me quite often.
Wow, that's about as north as you can get in Maine, isn't it?
It is. You literally throw a rock and you hit Canada. Like, literally, that's how close it was. So,
Nomar, I'm sorry to interrupt quickly.
Yeah.
But could you please take the cable to your mic and just put it out over your back or something? I believe your cable is making noise as you're talking
sorry
here.
about that.
There is some cable noise or something here. We'll try that. Okay.
See if that's any better.
All right.
So after kind of being frightened up until I was like 9, 10, 11 years old, I started looking for books on the paranormal and UFOs in the library. And I started reading everything I could on it. But, you know, at 10, 11, 12 years old, I didn't understand everything. But, you know, I was relating to the stories, and my fear kind of turned into fascination. And as I got into my later teens and early 20s, it was all fascination. I wasn't scared anymore. And I figured, if I was scared before, maybe people are scared now, and maybe I can help people not be so scared. And that's kind of started this road on talking to witnesses and collecting stories and all that good stuff. So that's kind of like the early beginnings of it all.
I see. Okay. Hey, Nomar, I'm going to ask you one more question. Do you happen to have a fan running?
I do.
Do you mind shutting that off?
I would love to, but I think I might die.
Well, it'll be for the good of the show. It's actually what's going on. We have a fan noise and air coming in through your mic, and sorry about that to the listener. But if you can move the fan away a little bit, I will take. We'll just pick that up during the break and see what we can do. All right.
Okay.
So I got to tell you, I was snowmobiling when I was I don't know, probably 14 or something like that, and I saw the Northern Lights. And I understand it scared the heck out of me. I didn't know what it was. It was just coming down from the sky, and it was like I was petrified, and I had no idea what it was until, you know, many years later I figured it out. It must have been the Northern Lights. But so I get that.
Yeah, it was strange, and it seemed low. You know, like, I don't know, when I think of the Northern Lights, I just think that it's just way up in the atmosphere, you know, but the optical illusion or whatever is happening, in my experience anyways, made it appear quite low, and I was just terrified. Yeah.
So, yeah, having something happen as a kid, really, it does kind of set in motion, you know, at least a curiosity, and which I really do appreciate. And you know, anyone that has that curiosity, it's kind of like gives life a little more meaning, you know, to have curiosity on things that are like the everyday person may not think of, you know.
Yeah, like you gain this like immediate knowledge that it seems like a lot of people don't have, or like you were saying, don't think about, you know, and it almost seems like you have this little secret,
right.
You know, makes you more aware. It's interesting.
I also think that someday, if we don't blow ourselves up, that we're going to be talking about someday we're going to know that if there's alien life out there, I don't want to say or not, but someday we're going to know if there's alien life out there, and it'll probably be a casual conversation of saying, do you remember them when we thought we were the only ones? How silly that was. You know, I think that someday that will happen.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's kind of interesting. I know flat Earth theory is kind of making a comeback right now, but for normal people that understand the Earth is round, uh, you know, what, a century ago, we all thought that the Earth was flat, like legitimately. That was just like common knowledge,
Well, yeah, many
and that we
centuries
were the
ago. Yeah.
center. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that we were the center of the universe, So, like, what are we going to know 10, 20, 30, 100 years from now, There's just no way to there's no way to not be open-minded, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You can be skeptical, you can ask questions, but open-minded you got to be.
Yeah. And just real briefly, we're going to be going into the break here in a little bit, but real briefly, can you go into the different topics that you cover in this book? I know, I believe, wasn't there actually a Mothman in sighting or something up in Maine?
Yeah, Camden, Maine. There was this odd creature that was seen, 25-foot wingspan. It was about 4 feet tall. Very odd. There's also Dogman
I'm sorry,
encounter.
how tall did you say?
About 4.5 feet, but
Okay.
a 25-foot wingspan.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yeah, that's huge. That's like a little Cessna or something. But there's also a Dogman encounter that I talk about. Men in black, crop circles, abductions, obviously. So lots and lots of crazy stuff.
Wow. Now, who's the guy in Portland? I just met him. Llewellyn. Who am I thinking of? He has the cryptology museum.
Oh, Lauren Coleman.
Yeah, Lauren Coleman. That's what I'm thinking of. So, I met him when Chris O'Brien was here.
Oh, that's right. I saw your picture there.
Yeah. So we were at the museum, and I met Lauren, and he says that there's been sightings, Bigfoot sightings in Maine, and
Absolutely.
that's nothing that I had ever heard of. But we have such wilderness. It's just an amazing wilderness. Of course, the Allagash incident happened there. I think that's a very credible case myself. Believe you and I talked about it the last time you were on the show.
We did.
So we are coming up on the break. I just want to say that thank you, everyone, for listening to us. We are on with Nomar Slevik, and you're listening to Podcast UFO on KGRA Radio. And we'll be right back right after this commercial break.
Okay, gentlemen, we're in the clear. 4 minutes in this break, brother.
4 minutes. Got it. Okay. All right. I'm going to try. Nomar, I briefly talked to you about this, and the way things have been going, I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I figured I would try to give this woman a call. If not, I'll try to remember her story if she doesn't actually answer. Her name is Jackie. Let's give her a call. She's a fun lady down in Massachusetts.
I'm going to check on that fan quick.
Oh, yes. If you could see if you could move it. I think it's coming in and affecting the... let's see. I think it's affecting the microphone somehow.
Can't all have AC.
Okay.
Hopefully that's a little better.
Oops.
So we still live on YouTube?
Yeah, we are still live. I have to do this over.
What's up, YouTube?
Now, the person I'm calling, her name is Jackie. She's a real character. And hopefully she will pick up the phone. I talked to her earlier today, but when I tried her again, she didn't. Now, I'm hoping that this doesn't put you on hold, but it's possible it does. Let's give it a try and see. I don't know how else I can add a call by dialing.
Also, should I be seeing your live picture or no?
I have it off right now.
Oh.
Okay. So if you go on hold, I'll figure out something to do here. Can you hear me now? I may just have, I think he goes on hold, so I may just have her call back if she's actually there. Well, this is something else. I can't. Won't let me hang up. Okay, let's see if I can go back over here. All right, Nomar, can you actually hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so you're back. That's good. Okay. Let's see. All right. So, anyway, I'll tell her story. Actually, I don't think we have enough time. Maybe I will tell it. I will tell it now. Race, do you mind telling me how much time we have left?
I don't mind it at all. Let me look. About 30 seconds until intro. Back to the show.
Okay, we don't have time for it.
Do you need more time? Do you need
No,
more time?
no, that's fine. We'll be fine.
Okay.
I'll bring it up during when we start back in.
Okay.
All right. So, YouTube listeners, thanks for hanging in. We started a little bit late, and thank you for, again, waiting for us. I haven't even looked at the chat room. We'll be taking calls after the top of the hour. There are actually people in chat. We may have questions.
Brother man, we're running right on time. Actually, we're about 15 seconds early. It's amazing.
Okay. So go ahead and count me down when you're ready.
Okay. Are you all set?
Yes, all set here.
Okay. Y'all are all set then. All right. Here we go, gang. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Podcast UFO on KGRA Radio. That's KGRAradio.com. My guest is Nomar Slevik. We went to break. We tried to wrestle up a woman I wanted to be on the show. I talked to her earlier today. She's all excited to be on. I told her exactly when I'd be calling. She got cold feet, obviously. So I'm going to tell her story. So what happened, and I love when things like this happen, but I was checking into a hotel. She was working at the hotel. And so I gave her my license, and she said, Sebago, Maine. I said, yeah. She goes, I know all about Sebago, Maine. She goes, I was on Sebago Lake. And so I was filling out paperwork, not paying too much attention. And I said, yeah, it's nice, and blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden I heard the word UFO. I go, what did you just say? And she said, I saw a UFO. She goes, I know it's weird, and you think I'm weird. I said, no, tell me about it. So basically, I think she said when she was in her teens, she was on an island camping in Sebago, and it was, I believe it was in the morning, and she looked up and she saw this craft, and she woke up. I may get some of this wrong, but this is the kind of the story she told me, that she told me about a couple months ago, I believe it was, so I may not be totally accurate, just to let you know. But they saw a craft, and the amazing thing that really struck me is because I've heard this a couple of times. She said it burst into several lights, and then it made a formation. I'm pretty sure she said a triangular formation, and then she said it shot off. And herself and several other people was witnessing this. And so anyway, that was, I love those type of stories when I hear like someone that's, just casually talking about it, or someone that they didn't know that I had an interest in UFOs. Those are really fun stories to hear. So that was a main story I was hoping to bring in tonight.
Yeah, and Martin, just so you know, I have a buddy whose family is from the Sebago Lake area, and I don't know does Sebago Lake go as far as where you are?
Oh yeah, I'm just a few miles away.
Okay. Well, his family is from the Sebago Lake area, and they have had odd encounters the whole time he lived there. And it was starting back in the early 80s, where he kind of saw this ET type creature peek through a window, a la Stan Romanek. I'm not a big fan of Stan Romanek, so I'm sorry I brought his name up. But if you just wanted a visual, that's what, when he described it, that's what it looked like. But again, he was a kid at the time. He was probably 6, 7, 8 years old. And also they saw lots of lights in the sky when they were on the canoe in Sebago Lake at night. And he also had a cryptid encounter while he was in Sebago. And there was this, it looked like it was a stone or brick home that had, kind of weathered over time, and so there was just like a partial wall still left up. And whatever this thing was perched on the top of this wall. And when they saw my buddy and his buddies coming down riding their bikes as they were kids, it like leaped off and ran the other way. But some pretty crazy stuff happening in Sebago, I think.
Wow. Now, I was talking to someone that said there was a major, I believe I talked to you or sent you an email asking you if you knew about this, and that was on Long Lake, which is actually connected to Sebago through a series of lock. There's a lock system that's been there since the 1830s.
Wow.
Different depths, like 3.5 feet different in depths. And I went up there with my boat, I don't know, maybe a month or a few weeks ago. But so Long Lake is a beautiful lake. It's in Naples, Maine. And someone told me they had a huge triangle UFO sighting over that was gliding right over the lake. And I believe you said you had not heard about that.
That's right.
Yeah. So I don't know if that was one that was even reported. And speaking of reported, is that one way you find out encounters in Maine, just through MUFON?
That is one way. I've been writing and researching extraterrestrials and UFO encounters for quite a while now, that I get sent leads either from the actual witness or somebody who knows a witness who says, hey, you should probably talk to this guy. And so I let them know that they can, send them my info, things like that. So that's how a lot of it is happening these days. It's, word of mouth, and I get personal emails, or I get Facebook messages from actual witnesses or people that know witnesses. And then that just kind of starts the ball rolling from there.
Now, it's really interesting how Facebook is playing into the UFO field, as so many other fields, but it really is a place where people connect.
Yeah, and it's a good way to be at arm's length, with this topic, especially in Maine. There's, a lot of people here are very reserved. They don't want to appear crazy, just like you said about that woman who saw the thing in Sebago. She's like, I know you think I'm crazy. That's how people still think a lot of the times, and I don't think there's any need to feel that way, but people feel that way, and I think via Facebook, there's a nice arm's length there where they can feel comfortable telling their story, but it's not like they did it in a room full of people.
So when you actually, I want to talk about this because the people of Maine are kind of unique in a way. Hard workers, especially, like the fishermen, the lobstermen. They're just like real earnest people, and really, really difficult to break the ice with sometimes. Hard to get to know. Once you befriend one, usually you become a lifelong friend. How do you feel? I feel like if you're speaking to someone, not that people are totally different from where they're at, where they live. All people are similar, but I think that because of their attributes, that a story can actually have more credibility in a certain way. And what's your thoughts on that?
I definitely agree. I think it's very important for me as a researcher and investigator to meet as many of these witnesses in person as much as possible. Hoaxing has become rampant in every genre, if you will, of the paranormal, that it really helps me to gauge the situation if I can meet the person in person. For some of the stories in my book, I could not meet the people. They might have started out reaching out to me and then got cold feet, kind of like what happened on today's call. And then sometimes all they want to share is via messenger, and that's it. So I don't get to talk to them in person, but I get their story, and I try to ask as many questions as possible. I probably come across as annoying, but when I can meet somebody, when I can look in their eye, when I can see their body language, it really helps me to determine whether this person is telling the truth or not. I'm not a cop. I'm not a human lie detector, so I'm just as fallible in detecting those. But at least I think there's more of a chance if I meet somebody in person, especially if I'm talking to a cop or somebody from the military. It's so compelling. Do
you have any stories that you can share that do involve either a cop or military that you wrote about this time?
Yeah, there's one of each actually. There's more military in this book. I think there's only one or two
at
things
Loring,
about
I saw
cops.
there was something at Loring.
Yeah, something at Loring, something at Dow Air Force Base, something in Pascagoula, Maine. But the one in Dow Air Force Base, used to be an Air Force Base in Bangor, Maine. It has since turned into the Bangor International Airport, and there is a recruiting center on site and a National Guard that's still on site. But otherwise, the military closed it back in 66, 68, something like that, and sold it back to the city. Anyway, during the time that it was operational, there was an air policeman who was responsible for doing rounds at night, walking around the base. And one particular night, he's kind of sitting in a ditch, but it's not, like this murky, mucky type of ditch. It's just, an indented area that his dog could lie in comfortably, and he was just kind of taking a rest. So he was part of a canine unit and again had the dog, and all of a sudden the dog broke and it took off and started barking. So he kind of stood up and was like very surprised. So he ran after the dog and yelling at it the whole time, and the dog stopped at the bottom of this hill and was looking up and barking in the direction at the top of the hill. So the air policeman walks up to the dog and is kind of yelling at it and being like, "Calm down, boy," and not really paying attention to what it was looking at. So finally, he looks up the hill, and he claims to have seen a 7-8 foot tall, hairy, humanoid bipedal creature standing at the top of the hill. Well, he called it in. MPs came out. He wrote a report, but they could never find what it was. And that was just one of many encounters at Dow. In my opinion, the Dow encounters kind of come off as like a mini Skinwalker Ranch. So if your listeners are familiar with Skinwalker Ranch, then you'll know what I mean. If not, you should look up Skinwalker Ranch. It's good stuff.
Oh, yeah. So are there actually UFO sightings, a lot of them in that area as well?
There is, yes.
And when that particular case happened, did they try to find any tracks or anything of this?
He said they did a search of the area, no tracks found. It was almost like it wasn't even there. Almost maybe, which was implied but not specifically said, maybe it was interdimensional.
Huh. Well,
it kind of appeared and disappeared.
That answer is as good as any other, if you ask me. Yeah. So what is the one that involves the police officer?
He was in the Sugarloaf area, and it was about 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and he was just doing his rounds as well, state trooper. And as he was driving along on the road, he was shocked to see this really large light on the road in front of him. So he screeches to a stop. He's looking at this thing. He's really just kind of blinded by the light, so he's not really seeing a craft at this point or anything, but he's seeing this light and it's right on the road, and he can clearly tell, sorry, I just hit the mic. He can clearly tell that it's not a vehicle. So he gets out. The thing's probably half a football length away from him, and it ascends a little bit and then goes over his car, and now it's about 50 feet hovering above its car. And at this point, or from this vantage point, he can see like this oval shaped craft, and there's lights going around it, and he's just looking at this thing in awe, and he can't get to his radio at the time, but the thing takes off and he gets in the car and files a report, and it's just left as unknown. Kind of reminds me of the Exeter encounter in New Hampshire.
Right. I know that must be they must think twice before they actually write a report like that.
I would think so.
Yeah. Just the ridicule factor, especially a police department,
Yeah. But you get a man with confidence, or, a police officer with confidence. Like, no, I know what I saw. Or that air policeman, I know what I saw. He wrote that report about the 8-foot tall, hairy bipedal humanoid being. This officer wrote about, it was an unknown aircraft, and I like it when they're confident in what they see. They're like, I know I saw this.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of other, at least police encounters, and I'm sure military too. Now, are there other military cases you can talk about?
Yeah, there's some other military cases in the book. There's another one from Llewellyn Air Force Base that took place in '64. In my previous book, I wrote about an encounter from 1975, but this other encounter took place 11 years beforehand. And again, it was an air policeman doing a patrol, and he was by the bomber area, which were armed, it is told, with nuclear weapons. And this was December, and while he was walking in that bomber section by the snowbanks behind the bombers, he could see some shadows kind of lurking about. And so he knew that was people, and so he called for them to come out. Nothing would happen. Everything went silent, and he's calling for them to come out, and then all of a sudden, these two beings appear in front of him, like 20 feet away, right in front of him. So he
Well, looks like Skype froze. Let's see what happens here.
Checking into it, Mark.
All right. Going to see what I can do here. Let's see. Hang on, everyone listening live. I apologize for this. We'll try to call him back. And let's see. Oops. I appreciate your patience, everyone. We'll be right back, hopefully. I'm not showing... His address is not coming up right. That's not right. Okay. Okay, here we go. This one was right. Okay. You're back.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, you froze.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Something we always do in Maine. Yeah.
It looks like I lost internet connection, so we can blame Spectrum for that. I'm not sure where we were in what you last heard. Was it they disappeared after he shot at them?
I don't know. I was too busy trying to get you back on. So yeah, just start from there. That's good.
All right. So he sees these figures. He's telling them, he's trying to apprehend them. They're not paying attention to him. They're not abiding him at all. So he shoots at them. As soon as he shoots at them, they disappear. Seconds later, the base comes alive, and other air policemen come to him and surround him, and he's put immediately under arrest. And somebody that is over him told him that he was an idiot for firing near nuclear weapons, and that he was promptly relieved of duty and almost charged with treason for the way he acted. He tried to explain what happened. They didn't care anything about that, and he's relieved of duty.
Wow.
So
was he actually, I mean, you can't set off a nuclear weapon by shooting it. I mean, they're so complicated.
Yes.
So that's kind of a bizarre reasoning for terminating him. But I guess firing a weapon, of course, anywhere on base is probably a major thing and needs, in-depth, they have to review why this happened. I think that's kind of a strange thing for them to relieve him. But,
yeah, that's his story, and he's sticking to it.
Yeah,
and,
but you can also understand, unfortunately, how crazy it does sound. So, that just may be what the people are going off. But, like you said, he stuck through that story, and even though there were consequences, he just stayed with it.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out in my new book, which is released by Llewellyn Worldwide Publishing, just so you know, I want to make sure I get their name out there. Mm-hmm. That when I write these stories, I leave it up to the reader to decide what they believe. I'm not trying to bias the stories in any way. There's only two stories that I share my opinion on, but that is it. I welcome yours, but I do share my opinion on two different stories. And one is the Allagash abductions, and one of them is the Herbert Hopkins case from Old Orchard Beach.
Okay, let's go into one of those.
Herbert Hopkins case. I wrote about it in my previous book, and I had since the publishing of that first book, I had befriended a family friend, a member of the family of the Hopkins family, and they introduced me to somebody who had passed away, and his name was Howard Hopkins. Howard was Herbert's nephew, and Howard spent a lot of time with Herbert. And before Howard died, he had a blog. He was a Maine writer. He wrote a lot of westerns, a lot of sci-fi stuff. So he was, popular in his own right. But he had this blog where he wrote about Herbert's experiences with the Men in Black. So if we kind of rewind back to Herbert's story, in the 1970s, Herbert claimed that a Men in Black had visited him at his home in Old Orchard Beach and told him to stop studying UFOs, and especially the David Stevens case, that he was actually in the middle of researching and providing hypnotic regression therapy for Mr. Stevens and going through all that. And the Men in Black, according to Herbert, did like a paranormal parlor trick, if you will, and told Herbert that he had a coin in his pocket and to hold the coin in his hand and to watch the coin. So Herbert watched the coin, it got blurry and then disappeared, and the Men in Black guy said, "That'll happen to your heart if you don't stop studying this."
Oh.
So this scared him. It is claimed that he burned all his tapes, stopped helping in the David Stevens case. And then a few days later, his children were actually visited by the Men in Black as well. They had a weird encounter that was actually a bit sexual in nature, which is kind of interesting and odd. And Howard, Herbert's nephew, in this blog talks about what he really thinks happened. He doesn't believe Herbert Hopkins at all. He doesn't believe his uncle. He loved his uncle. He adored his uncle. But he also said that the family had a lot of tragedy in it, with alcohol abuse, with drug abuse, and that his uncle, Herbert, made up the story of the Men in Black so he could kind of have his 15 minutes of fame. And that went viral for the time. It was even included in the Time Life the Time Life books, the Time Life mysteries. So it went viral for its time. And Howard really wanted to set the record straight. So he claimed, that Herbert made it all up, and that the encounter that the children had wasn't really an encounter at all. It was, they were swingers, and this unknown couple came over with an agreement to swing together, and that's really all it was. And then it ends very oddly. So Herbert's son moves away to Florida with his wife, Maureen, and Maureen ends up killing Herbert's son. We don't know if it's a drug-fueled stupor or what happened, but he ended up getting shot in cold blood. And this was 2005, maybe, something like that. Anyway, so it had this really tragic ending, and I know it can be confusing between the Howard and Herbert, but I do lay it out pretty succinctly in the book. So check it out. And in my personal opinion, I believe Howard, not Herbert.
Okay, now I forget which one is Howard and which was Herbert.
Herbert was the uncle who met the Men in Black.
Yeah.
Howard is the nephew.
And you believe Howard?
Yes.
Believe Howard on that one. So what was the David Stevens case?
The David Stevens case was a supposed abduction that happened right around that same time frame, 1975, and this was in Norway, Maine.
Yep.
And David and a friend, I believe his name was Glenn, heard this loud boom outside. And so they went to investigate, and they saw this UFO, and so they wanted to chase it. They get in their car, and David Stevens claims that the car kind of took control of its own and went down to this lake. And while it was parked at the lake, this fog or mist kind of started rolling up over the water, engulfed their car, and they were taken aboard this craft. through hypnotic regression that Herbert Hopkins was doing, that was introduced by UFO investigator Shirley Fickett. David described what the beings looked like. They took, hair, blood, nails, fingernail samples, things like that. So kind of your classic abduction case on what he experienced. And Brent Raines was down there and he interviewed them. Dr. Schwartz, he was down there and actually interviewed them. He wrote about the case in his book, UFO Dynamics. And another author, Robert Cahill, he actually pointed out that a week before David Stevens' abduction, the UFO incident premiered on television, which was the movie version of the Betty and Barney Hill story. And so it was just a week prior. So in Robert Cahill's opinion, the story was probably made up. And Dr. Schwartz and Raines and Fickett and Hopkins, they believed David Stevens' story. And I think Stevens' story is actually very compelling. I'm not of the opinion with Cahill. I don't really write about that in the book, my opinion there, but that's pretty much the Stevens case in a nutshell.
Huh. And had they ever come up to any type of conclusion or is it just also like an unknown encounter type of thing?
Yeah, it always ends as an unknown, but there were some very odd other experiences that happened, kind of lingering paranormal experiences that happened after the abduction. They said that they went back to the lake, the area that they were abducted in, and there was a weird ash that was falling, kind of like snow, but it wasn't snow. It wasn't that time of year. And in David Stevens' house, he said that these black squares would be coming in and out of the walls and ceilings.
Wow.
Which is very, very odd. And then he also said that he heard from the TV the term UFO, like he just heard UFO, and the TV was turned off, and so some odd things like that. And yeah, I know.
Yeah, bizarre. Okay, so we're coming up on the break right now. You're listening to Podcast UFO on KGRA Radio. My guest is Nomar Slevik, and we'll be right back right after this commercial break.
Right on time. Martin, good job. We've got 3.5 minutes in this break.
Okay, 3.5 minutes. Thank you. All right, Nomar, so while we're on this break, why don't we talk about one of the stories in your last book, UFOs Over Maine, for the people that didn't get a chance to actually hear that show. Is there anything you can quickly bring up that you can recall?
Yeah, there's a great case called Shots Fired. Well, I called it. That's the name.
So we have
of the
like
chapter,
3.5 minutes, just to let you know. Yeah.
Yep. And it was a case of John King. It actually took place in Bangor, Maine. It took place on Mount Hope Avenue, which is actually just around the corner from where I used to live, which is kind of interesting. I didn't know it at the time, but I've since found out and have gone to the area. Anyway, John King thought he saw an overturned car in a marshy area. So he pulled over and started walking into the marshy area, but he was trying to avoid the water, so he's kind of hopping around rocks and it's more solid ground. And as he gets closer, he sees that it's not an overturned car whatsoever, that in fact it's like this oval-shaped craft of some sort. And once John observes that, it seems like the craft decided to interact with him, and it started rocking back and forth and then started going right towards him. So he panics, runs back to the car, and inside his car he had a .22 pistol. So in the melee of trying to get the pistol, the gun went off, and he thought for sure that might scare whatever this thing is off. It didn't. So it was still coming at him, and so he kind of steadied himself and took aim and hit the UFO. He heard it ping off, and right when that happened, it instantly ascended. He called the cops. The cops came down and checked it out, and they saw some scorched vegetation in the marshy area. But other than that, they didn't have really any other leads to go on. So it was ultimately dropped from a police investigation, but he did report it.
Wow. So while we still have about a minute, I don't know if there's any other quick.
exactly 30 days later, a very similar UFO was seen in Bingham, Maine, by a little girl named Kim.
I know where Bingham is. I've actually been there. Yeah.
Cool. And this oval craft landed softly in a field, and she was there playing with some cousins. The cousins had left to go grab some more toys, so she was by herself. And she said that she could see through the craft and that there was a man or an alien. She didn't quite know how to describe it, but was wearing a helmet, and it smiled at her. So this freaked her out, and she ran back home, told her mom. The paper followed up and did a report. The police went and checked the area and also saw some scorched vegetation. So I'm wondering if it was the same craft,
How about that? Scorched vegetation, that the only thing I can think of hearing that, I know that's happened. There was a case where the ground was, there's probably been a number of them, the ground was scorched, but also the Socorro case, there was the trees out there that were burned, the bushes, the brush.
Yeah.
So that's always interesting. That's as close as you can get to, any type of trace evidence.
Yeah, that's like some legit evidence.
Ready to go back, Martin?
All right, just give it a countdown.
All right, give me about 15 seconds here.
All right. So we'll talk. Nomar, we'll go into some stories, some other stories. What you think is the most fascinating? We'll talk about that if that's okay.
The Mothman one is pretty crazy.
All right.
All right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Podcast UFO on KGRA Radio. KGRAradio.com. My guest is Nomar Slevik. We're talking about his new book, Otherworldly Encounters, Evidence of UFO Sightings and Abductions. And this is in the Northeast. So this has been really interesting to me, of course, because I live here. But and also, the Bridgewater Triangle. I don't know if you looked into that at all. But
I've watched the documentary.
yeah. So what in writing this book? I have to ask you, what was your favorite or most interesting story that you can tell us about?
Right.
Or is there a number of them?
So,
I'm sure.
There's a number of them, but I'm a big fan. Of course, I love UFOs and extraterrestrial. It's kind of like my bread and butter, what I love the most. In my opinion, it's kind of like the last frontier of the paranormal. Like, it's still so much is unknown about it. But regardless of that, or with that said, there are some other types of paranormal that I'm very much interested in. And some of them are the black-eyed children. Those terrify me. Dogman encounters, those are really quite weird. And I actually got a pretty good Dogman story that we'll get into later. But I absolutely love the Mothman story.
Okay.
And of course, we're talking
4
about
foot
the Mothman.
and 25 feet wide.
Yeah. So the original Mothman story took place back in 1966 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There was a book written about it. Since then, there's been a ton of books written about it. There was a movie and some really great documentaries. Small Town Monsters made a great one called The Mothman of Point Pleasant. You should check that out if you can, smalltownmonsters.com. But there was what this witness described as a Mothman encounter of his own in Camden, Maine in October of 2001, which is almost 35 years to the month from the original Mothman encounters back in Point Pleasant. So just a little synchronicity info there. But this gentleman at the time was 17, and he was walking home on Washington Street. If you've ever been to Camden, Maine,
Yes.
Washington Street is right smack dab in the middle of Camden. It's actually right next to the police station and the big Camden Hotel. I forget the name of it now. And he lived just about less than a mile up Washington Street, walking away from town. So he's walking home. It's early evening, so we're talking 6, 7 p.m. It's in the summer, so it's not even that dark out yet. And he starts hearing like this chirping type of sound. He can only describe it as really like a loud mouse, if you will. So he's looking down, trying not to step on what is probably a large mouse, And as he's looking down, he sees this large shadow go past him. Well, the only way that shadow could have been there was if it was above him. So he looks up and he sees a very, very odd-looking creature. He described it as the body length was about 4.5 feet, and it was kind of grayish in color, and its head was made of like tubes. There was like a tube sticking out and then tubes on the side. Maybe think of the Pascagoula incident, or however you pronounce that. with the cones coming out. So kind of like that. But he saw that it had enormous wings. So he's frozen to this spot watching this thing fly, and it flies up over his house where he lived at the time. So in doing that flight pattern, he was able to measure the length of the winds, and it said it went from one end of the eaves to the other end of the eaves of the apartment that he was living in at the time of the spokes. And so they measured that a few days later and found that it was 25 feet long. So he couldn't believe he saw something with a 25-foot wingspan. And it flew up over the apartment and swooped down to a marshy area behind the apartment somewhere. He didn't really know where. So he told friends and family and people about this, and he really wasn't scoffed at, but they're like, it was probably a large bird, maybe a turkey vulture, maybe a sandy hill crane, something like that. He knew it was nothing like that. And then the dreams started, which is kind of interesting because there's like some concurrent themes here with the Mothman of Point Pleasant and what's happening to this guy, where he starts having these UFO encounters. And he thinks they're dreams, but when he really stops and thinks about it, he's thinking that they're actually memories. Like he just kind of knows it. Like when you think about a memory, it's just something it's hard to explain. But if a dream, you're like recalling a dream and trying to explain it the best way you can. But this really felt like a memory. In this dream, which he had time and time and time again after the incident, he's standing at that exact same spot where the thing flew over him, and he looks up and he sees this large craft silently and without lights hovering above him. When he notices it, it kind of roars to life, very loud, very big, and then takes off. And he kept having this dream, a recurring dream. So fast forward a couple of years now, he kind of wrote it out. He knew he saw something that was weird. Friends and family didn't really believe him or thought he misidentified something. But a couple of years later, he's in college now and came home for the summer to visit or to work, And on one of his off days, he's riding around with a buddy. And as they're riding around, this thing splats against their window. Freaks them right out. And the witness is looking right at it, and it's this weird transparent grayish flesh, and it's got a really large wingspan, maybe 4 feet, maybe 6 feet, something like that. And in his mind, he's thinking, is it an offspring of the thing he saw 2 years earlier? So they roll to a stop, and they both assume this thing is dead. Just as the car stops, it flutters, takes off, and flies towards the marshy area again, where he witnessed it the first time.
Was this all evenings?
No, that one was the daytime one.
That was a daytime. So he actually, during the day, he must have been able to get a much better look at it.
Oh, yeah. And however, the way it was splatted against the window, he described it as like messy paper mache. Like that's all he could make out, and like these weird translucent type bat wings. He actually drew it, and there is a copy of it. Do you have the book in front of you, Martin?
I do, yes. Mm-hmm.
Page 101.
Okay. So,
and he drew what he thinks it looked like.
Now you just mentioned the Pascagoula.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to. Oh yes, here it is. Here I'm going to put it up. Let's see. Put it up so anyone can see that on YouTube itself. And
I'll do it on my end too, just in case.
Yeah. Boy, I'm not good at aiming this. So there it is. So Calvin Parker was one of the two. There was himself and Charles Hickson at the Pascagoula case. Very interesting case back in 1973. Calvin is a fine gentleman. He's been on this show before.
Nice.
I heard he was starting a book.
It's done and out.
Yeah, I got him connected with Philip Mantle over in England.
Nice.
And so that book's coming out. So I just wanted to announce that Calvin Parker will be on the show again to talk about the book. And he was such a great guest. I'm really looking forward to having him back. He's going to be on August 7th. So he'll be on the show. Again, great guy. I just want to make sure that date is right. Yeah, that is August 7th is a Tuesday. So he'll be on the show then. So that's interesting. I really like the oddball stories, things that, I can't remember who I had as a guest on the show, but that was something they mentioned. The odder they are, like someone said something about the teddy bear on the porch with a plaid material. That sounds awful odd during UFO encounter, but I want to know more about that. The really odd, weird, strange things that don't make any sense. Sometimes they're just really interesting.
I have some stories about this woman who experienced missing time, and the
I
first
saw
time
that.
was
I think I saw it.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and the first time was with her whole family during a UFO sighting, and then the second time she doesn't even remember seeing anything odd. It was during the day, and she had missed like 3 hours. Very crazy.
3 hours, boy.
Yeah.
Those missing time cases are really interesting to me too. So we are taking calls. Just to let the listener know, you can call in. The number on YouTube will be up on your screen also. And I hesitate to say that call over the air, and the reason is I get tons of calls like when this show is playing on different shows, including it's always on the Dark Matter Digital Network, the full shows. And just to let the listener know, that time has changed. It's now, I believe, at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time instead of 9 or 10 where it used to be. Anyway, so that number's up on the screen. It's also in the chat over at KGRA chat over there. And I'm sure we have some. I'm going to try to pay attention to some of the questions that we have, but anyone can call in. Again, that number's up on the screen if you'd like to call in and ask our guest a question. Also, if you happen to be listening from Maine or the Northeast, and you have a story that you'd like to call in and talk about, it doesn't have to be UFO. We prefer that, but if it's another kind of strange happening, you're also welcome to call in and tell us about it. I found that when you and I have talked in between your books, you've always been interested in the stories that I have that I tell you. But as far as, I'm sure you know this, there's a hesitancy for people to report in general, and so before we go into this other stories, some other stories, how do you generally break the ice with, say, a lobsterman or someone like that? Oh, we have someone calling in. Hold that thought, okay? We're going to think lobsterman. All right. So caller, welcome to the show. And your first name and where you're calling from, please.
Hey, Martin. This is Ryan from South Carolina.
Hey, Ryan. How are you?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for calling in. You got a question for our guest?
Yes, I do. Hopefully I didn't call it a bad time.
No, not at all.
No, what's going on, Ryan?
Hey, what's going on, man?
Hey.
I had a question for your guest. Since he's documented so many of these encounters, I wonder if he had a theory about how the aliens can handle our environment and how we can handle theirs in terms of physical environment. Because to me, that's always been one of the really difficult things to me to get past. Because you think about it, I mean, for example, in the Apollo moon landings, astronauts were having to wear suits because, obviously the atmospheric pressure is different there, the environment's different, the temperature's different, and it's just always amazed me how so many of these stories, the aliens are taking our environment, and we're able to go aboard their ships and take theirs. I just wondered if he had a theory there.
Well, Ryan, I do have a couple of thoughts on it, and one of them is a bit more mundane than the other, but in my opinion, I really think, and this is like, you got to be open-minded, because you were saying you have a hard time getting past it. To be so open-minded is to think that if this is real, A, do you believe in extraterrestrials to begin with? And B, if you do believe in extraterrestrials, then how much more technologically advanced could they be from us? And in my opinion, are they wearing suits the way we perceive them right now? Are we perceiving them as how they are, or are we perceiving them the way they want us to see them? The point being is that they could be wearing suits, they could be wearing breathers, they could have a technology where there's just this invisible force field of some sort is around them. But really, that's it. Be open-minded, and they're probably more technologically advanced than us. But in regards to like a solid theory, absolutely not. I just have no idea what's going on. And the more I talk to people and get these stories, the more confused I am. It doesn't lead to more answers. It leads to more questions.
Can I just chime in? I'd like to chime in on that a little bit.
Yeah.
I always think about when the Spaniards, landed in the Mexican peninsula, and then their European diseases wiped out entire indigenous people, and especially in the missions when they were trapped them in these missions and tried to change their ways, even change their to Christian names and all that. So they just wiped them out. So I always think of that, like if you were to go on another planet where you could actually breathe the air, you're just so vulnerable to any type of unknown disease that could be lurking there. And that's how I feel also. If they can actually breathe our air here, wouldn't that be a major concern, or do they actually get shots before they come here?
I honestly think they're technologically advanced enough to immunize themselves, if that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, I know.
It's probably that, but there's a few little hoops you got to jump through first to get there, and that's A, are UFOs real? B, if so, are they extraterrestrial? If they are extraterrestrial, how are they physically getting here? If they're physically getting here, then you start asking questions about the environment and what Ryan was asking, so there's a few hoops to get there, if you follow me. And if you're already starting at that place where you believe and all that good stuff, and they are coming here physically, then there's probably some sort of technological advancement that they have that we don't, that allows them to be in our environment.
Right. Ryan, you got anything else?
Well, yeah, just to follow up, I believe that there's likely intelligent life elsewhere. To me, the idea, in this galaxy alone, there are billions of stars. The idea that we're the only ones, that to me, that's just preposterous. Now, whether or not that's come here, I don't know about that, and that's some of these stories. That's one of the things that always bothered me. But if you think in terms of maybe they're wearing some kind of electric or magnetic field that gives them a self-contained atmosphere, and that's their suit. Okay, that makes sense to me. But then you still run into the problem of, for example, there are stories of them grabbing abductees and leading them somewhere and all that kind of stuff. And none of these people, to my knowledge, have ever reported that feeling some sort of shock or something.
One thing I would like to inject here, Ryan, is the number of times I have spoken with Travis Walton. He has told me that when he woke up on that table in the craft, that he had a very, very hard time breathing the air in. That's the only time I've heard anyone ever talk about anything like that. But he said he had to really force the air in and out of him to breathe, which is really curious. Just another but that's really the only one that I've ever heard of any type of incident where there was something different.
Right, but it also, it gets into gravity. I don't know if Travis ever described, feeling any different in terms of gravity being aboard their ship versus ours. And
I'm going to ask him that in a couple of weeks when I see him.
Yeah, because that's another thing that kind of throws me for a loop. Because a lot of times these descriptions of these aliens, they're kind of smaller and more fragile than we appear to be, and you'd think that the planet they come from probably has less mass than our own, so you'd think they would be used to less gravity, and here they are coming to a planet with a lot more gravity. It's not like when we went to the moon and there, it has 15% of the gravity of Earth, and this situation is reversed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost like, are they going to implode? But again, do they have this force field around them,
right.
or what's happening? And I can't cite a specific case, but I seem to remember that people kind of feel that the air is like electrically charged within the sighting of a UFO, but that's all I can really seem to remember right now.
Yeah, some people have mentioned that. Is that it, Ryan? You all set?
Yep, that's it.
All right.
Nice
Thanks for
talking to you,
calling
man.
in.
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
All right. So again, the line's open. If you're on KGRA radio, over in the chat there, it was posted in. The phone number was posted over there. It's also up on YouTube. Anyone that wants to call in is welcome to call in. Now, we were talking about lobstermen, and that's just I can say lumberjacks, or, I got to know some lumber people way up in Maine in the Grand Lake Stream area. I don't know if you even know where that is, but it's a beautiful part, Grand Lake, Maine, way up there, and it's a hard life. They're really very sort of macho, I guess you'd call them,
Sure.
if you wanted to generalize. Again, everyone, I don't want to just say all, Mainers are this way or that way. But how do you break the ice when you're trying to talk to someone? How do you get their confidence? I mean, that must be really difficult, knowing Mainers.
I would say early on it might have been, but I'm just very used to talking to people now, and for me it's about kindness and talking to them with an open-minded skepticism, which is pretty much, sans judgment. Because the last thing, especially in Maynard, but the last thing anybody wants to feel is judged, especially in a negative manner. And so I'm very assuring of the fact that all I want is to hear the story. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and if it's okay with you, then I will share the story on a bigger level, only if that's okay with you. And I've never gone back on that word. I've never once published a story that somebody told me not to. That would just go against everything that I believe in and everything that I told them,
I've been talking with quite a bit with Lee Spiegel. He's out. Actually, he just came back from California. He was out there for like 6 weeks, coming back for a week and going back out again. They're trying to get James Fox their movie done.
Nice.
Completed in
Love
the editing
James.
room, working around the clock out there. And he has told me that they've had major interviews. They've had a couple of major interviews lined up where they actually flew, even, I believe one of them even out of the country to get to, and the person had cold feet right in the middle of the interview. Can you imagine?
It's happened to me. It's happened to me many times.
Really?
There were some great stories that I even wrote up, and once it came time to send them the release letter, because anytime a story is about to be published and I use names, I have to send them a release to say that it's okay.
Oh yeah, the release.
And
sure.
yeah, and that's when cold feet starts. That's when it starts to get real. So then I counter with, how about I use a pseudonym? Sometimes that has worked. You'll see it in the book when a person's name is listed, and then in parentheses right next to it, it'll say pseudonym. That's mostly because they didn't want their name known. That is the case in the Mothman case. I spoke to the gentleman, but that's not his real name in the book. But anyways, it's about being kind, and if they don't want to use it, you got to respect it.
A lot of people will say that, nothing really means anything unless someone gives their real name. But I understand that. I've actually offered. There was a pilot I sat next to on a flight out west that actually told me about. He was in the Air Force flying a F-18, I think it was, and had a green orb UFO encounter. And I said to him, "Hey," but he was an airline pilot still for United. And I said, "Do you mind coming on my show?" And he wouldn't even come on anonymously. So some people even get cold feet, right, when they're anonymous.
Oh, yeah. There was a gentleman that I spoke to who currently works for a major New York newspaper that has a couple of pretty incredible encounters, and towards the end of it, wasn't able to use the name or where he works, because that would have been pretty incredible in my opinion. Especially the type of work that he was doing. I thought it would lend a lot of credibility to the story. So I ended up having to refer to the story somewhat vaguely towards the end of my book.
All right,
And
so pardon me. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I wanted to get into some other stories if we could. And instead of me just picking one out, besides this one, I would like to ask you the invasion in Scarborough. That one just sounds interesting. Scarborough is just below Portland, Maine, right along the coast. So let's hear that one, and then I want you to talk about a couple of other UFO incidents.
Yeah, absolutely. The Scarborough quote unquote invasion. Some of the titles maybe seem a little fantastic, but if you look through the contents, the table of contents of the book, what I'm going through is like a 50s and 60s sci-fi feel for the name of the chapters. So there's like Starship Trooper and things like that.
Yeah.
So just an FYI on that. But invasion in Scarborough kind of seems a bit fitting. This was somebody going to the drive-in movies in Scarborough, and that drive-in is still there. And as the cars are shuffling or moving their way slowly into the drive-in, this one individual in particular saw this really bright light from a little ways away, probably 200 yards, like 2, maybe 3 football fields away. And it was just very oddly placed. It was kind of like on the side of the road, but up towards the tree line a little bit. It didn't seem right to him. And he almost thought it was like the National Guard maybe doing some training or something. So he kind of kept spying this as he's trying to make his way into the drive-in so they can watch the movie. And it's getting closer and it's getting closer. Now other people are starting to see it. And this light then kind of dims and a large craft is observed. And this craft is traveling just below the treetops. And it actually makes its way over the drive-in theater screen. So it's like half peeking over the drive-in theater screen, and there's 80, 100 people there. And this witness said that some people were dropping their things and screaming and running, and he never really kind of knew what to make of it or what happened with it, but he certainly reported it to MUFON, and MUFON investigated it and ultimately came back as unknown. They didn't have anything to attribute it to.
Wow. Now, you had a, I believe, was it a chapter or something that was written by someone from MUFON, right?
Yeah. I've been working with Valerie Schultz. She's the Maine state director of MUFON and New Hampshire, actually. And her and I have been working together pretty closely. And she shared 6, 7, 8 stories in this book. And we co-wrote a couple of them together. And the invasion in Scarborough is one of those. And she's a wealth of knowledge. I do have some apprehension working with MUFON, especially since the John Venture fiasco, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually the Maine state director. He was the state director of 9 different states, including Philly and Maine. I'm not sure if he was New Hampshire as well.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, once the racism thing came out, he was immediately removed from, his state director titles in all 9 states. And Valerie, who was the assistant state director at the time, was promoted to state director. Now, I feel apprehensive working with MUFON, but the field investigators, the assistant director, the director, it is all non-paid volunteer work. And these people are hardworking, honest people really trying to do just exactly what you and I and other investigators are trying to do, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get stories and share them. So I have a hard time judging the actions of a few to the entire corporation, if you will. So I have a great relationship with Val, and we're going to continue to work together. We actually have a meeting this Saturday up in Millinocket.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't get there from here. That's in one of the that's a Bert and I skit, I believe, if anyone knows that.
Can't get
there from here.
I think I have a Bert and I vinyl.
Yeah, right. Okay, so a couple of them. I wanted you said there was another encounter that you had your own opinion on. And what was that?
Yeah. That was actually the Allagash
Okay, yeah,
abductions.
let's hear that.
Well, there's a newspaper up in Presque Isle. I think it's called like the Fiddlehead Press or something. It really just is the major newspaper in Presque Isle. I think it was called the Presque Isle Times or the Presque Isle Herald or something at one time, but it's changed to like the Fiddlehead something or other. I forget. It's in the book. Anyway, this article came out where one of the 4 members of the Allagash abduction has since recanted his claims.
Oh, I know about that. Yeah, there's been a lot of friction about that, and I've heard a little inside directly from. But go ahead.
Sure. Well, there's been some infighting, and is it Chuck?
Chuck has been on this show way back when. Chuck and Jim.
Jim, Jack, and Charlie still believe that they were abducted, but Chuck no longer does. Chuck Rack is his name.
No, I'm sorry, you're right. You're right. It was Charlie that I had on.
Okay, so you must have had Jim and Charlie?
Yeah, I had Jim and Charlie on. Yes.
Gotcha. And the name of that newspaper is the Fiddlehead Focus, and it's out of Madawaska, Maine. And
for the listener that doesn't know, fiddlehead is a fern, and they cut them in the spring and cook them up and put butter and vinegar and pepper. They good.
They are tasty.
Yeah.
Think a more wild asparagus, kind of?
Yeah, that's right.
Depends on what you put on. Yeah. But this article came out in 2016 where Chuck Rack, one of the 4, has distanced himself and says that it never happened. He even has discrepancies in how big the wood was that they put on their fire, because the fire that they built is kind of the crux of their missing time,
right.
Where they built this huge fire where they used wood that was as big as 10, 12, 15 inches around, and that they kind of made it bonfire style so they could make their way back to shore after doing some night fishing. Well, Chuck Rack now states that they use smaller, less than a diameter of someone's forearm type of wood, which is why it burned out a lot more quickly. And it didn't last as long as they say, and that missing time didn't happen. But anyways, the other 3 gentlemen said it did happen, that they were abducted. And the reason I give my opinion in this particular story is because this was the first UFO story that I ever heard of taking place in Maine.
Right.
And I saw it on my favorite television show as a child, which was Unsolved Mysteries. You get Robert Stack and a UFO story, and I'm enthralled. You're enthralled. I don't care who you are. You're enthralled, when you add Robert Stack and UFOs. Anyway, so that's where I first heard the Allagash abduction story, and so I was fascinated by it. Years later, I ended up getting Raymond Fowler's book on the Allagash abductions, and this is a thorough telling of the story with investigations and hypnotic regression and all this really, really great stuff. And so I've been a believer of this story. And Jim, Jack, and Charlie have described that Chuck's actions have been almost violent at some points, and
That's
he's
right.
not welcome. Yeah, and he's not welcomed at some UFO conferences anymore. And once you get violence and name calling and all that stuff played into the mix, this is just me, personal opinion, Nomar Slevik, as an individual. You're going to be violent, I got no time for you. So I'm just of the opinion that the other 3 are telling the truth, and that's what I'm sticking to.
That's I was trying to find my correspondence with Charlie on that, because he did clear some things up on that, and it's an incredible story. It really is.
It is.
Oh, here
it
he
is
is right here. So let me just see if I can. Okay. I'm
Can you give
hoping
out
it's
his
okay. I
email
can read
address?
this. I'll try to stay away from any sensitive part of it. But this was actually from Charlie. He says, well, Chuck has always had a mercenary motive in his actions and behavior, which is a major reason we distance ourselves from him. What I'm going to do is I'm going to contact Chuck and just see if it's okay. And if it's not okay, I'll just pull this from the from the audio.
If you can keep it, though, I just want to comment: mercenary motive.
Yeah.
Like that's
he basically says he has some issues and violent traits, which has banned him from many UFO conferences and live and venues.
I think he did share that with the Fiddlehead Focus, but I know your source is the email, so I understand that.
Yeah. And they were approached by Henry Winkler, of all people, to make a movie based on the Allagash experience, but declined due to the differences because of Chuck.
How recent was that? Do you know?
No, I don't know. But anyway, so that's the problem with that. And I think it is interesting, but to me, that the whole story, I mean, I'd love to have Jack on. I haven't spoken with Jack, but I heard an interview on Open Minds with Alejandro.
That's a great interview. It
is an amazing interview, and especially near the end when he says some things that are just profound. I think anyone can find that interview if you look on Open Minds and just put in Jack's name. It's really, really something. One of my favorite interviews that I heard on Open Minds that Alejandro did, actually. So, yeah, the Allagash, to me, they had the sighting the day before, with witnesses and, just the whole thing. And then they spoke with the ranger. But just the lapse of their memory for all those years until, things started happening.
Like a lot of people, it's kind of like Roswell, like that really didn't hit its stride until like 30 years later, and it's kind of similar with the Allagash case. Like it wasn't really spoken about until years later when one of the gentlemen, I forget who it was now, started having those weird dreams,
It was Jim. He had fallen,
Okay.
He was on a construction site and fell down into a hole and injured his back severely. And he was in the hospital for, I think, months.
Wow.
And he started having those dreams. And then to find out they all had those dreams. This is basically, I'm recounting this for people who haven't actually heard the story itself. And then he saw Whitley Strieber's book. Did you ever hear that part?
I did.
Yeah. There was a little cart going around with books in the hospital, and he saw the cover of Whitley Strieber's book, and he just went into like this panic. And he said that it was all ringing a bell to him, the whole thing, and it all came back to him, which it all came back to everyone else. And as well as their artwork, I don't know, their artwork all changed. And Jack actually began to work, his math all of a sudden excelled, and he started working with space programs of some type. It's all really a fascinating story. He had no interest in it before, and became very accomplished. And very, very interesting case. And I wish there would be a film made on a real thorough documentary, because I don't really believe there's one out there, not that I'm aware of, that's really good. And,
No.
Definitely an interesting case. So one of the things you mentioned earlier also, you said you got to talk about the Dogman case, so let's hear about that one.
There's actually a Dogman encounter in the book, and it was actually covered on the Sci-Fi Channel, and I think it's called The Wolf Pack. Let me look that up quick, because you can watch it for free on YouTube. Bear with me one sec here.
Yeah. But when did this happen?
That was, I think it was 2006. But I wanted to tell another encounter. So since you can read that story in my book and actually watch their story on the Sci-Fi Channel, there were some liberties taken, but it's still fascinating. It's on the Paranormal Witness TV show, and I believe it's called Wolfpack. But I spoke to a gentleman probably 3 weeks ago who spoke of a Dogman encounter up in Eustis, near Farmington. And this happened in the summer of 94, 95. He's not really sure. But he went camping with his wife and young son. His son at the time was 4 or 5 years old. And he was playing outside in front of the camper. And mom and dad were inside. And dad started looking, like watching the son to make sure he was okay. And he saw right at the tree line, but out from the woods, some weird creature silently watching his son. And so he became very frightened and thought that this creature was going to attack his son. So he opens the door, and he says he's about a telephone pole's length away from this creature, and that it had a big wolf's head, and it had grayish, brownish type fur, which is very common in these types of encounters, and it was crouched down. In the crouched down position, the legs, the hind legs, or the legs in general, kind of looked like a kangaroo because it was crouched down and had like a big underside, if you will. But he didn't see any type of kangaroo tail or anything. But that's just what it reminded him of as it was crouched down. And that if this thing stood, he estimated it would probably be about 7 feet long or something, or 7 feet tall, because of how crouched the legs were. So he went, got his kid, brought him back in the camper, looks outside the window, and this creature is gone. A couple weeks later, he and some friends and family who told the story to a lot of people said, somebody who was up in that area camping shot something that was really odd looking. And the Maine Inland and Fisheries came in and took the creature.
Wow.
So again, this was in 94, 95. So I emailed them and explained the encounter the best I could, and gave them the time frame, and just wanted to ask the findings of whatever creature they got. Was it just some sort of, mundane wolf, or a wolf with mange, or, was it a kangaroo, or, something like that. But I've yet to hear back from them. So the next time I'm in Augusta, that's where their headquarters is. I'm going to stop in and see if I can talk to somebody.
They call those Maine-garoos. Yeah.
Mangaroos.
Yeah. Wow. That is strange. And I actually have when I was growing up in Elliot, Maine, I had my next door neighbor was somewhere up in Maine and shot the weirdest looking. It was some type of probably just messed up genetically deer, but it was healthy running in the woods, but it was the strangest looking thing I had ever seen. It was a buck, and they call bucks like 8-point buck with the little points on the antlers. This had over 40 points on it. It was
what?
The most bizarre looking thing you ever saw.
That's crazy.
And it had a little short hind section, little tiny hind section, and a real broad, real broad shoulders up.
Like did it sit at an angle?
Yeah,
kind of.
It was like a real
weird.
It was the strangest looking thing. So yeah, I mean they were probably weird animals in Maine, and Maine is such a vast, Maine itself is there's so much undeveloped land and woods up there. As a matter of fact, there was a man that moved up from Massachusetts up toward the Allagash somewhere, and decided to disappear for something like over 20 years. Did you hear about that? A Massachusetts resident moved up there?
Oh, yeah, the Hermit of Maine. There was a book written about him.
And that's right. And there was I believe he only encountered one person the entire time?
One person the entire time, but he was getting by stealing supplies at nearby camps.
Oh, that's the part I didn't hear.
Yeah, so
okay.
The game wardens kind of got wise to this, so they started setting up some cameras at this camp I think it was a camp for girls, but don't quote me on that. But they set up some cameras to see if they could catch whoever it was, and sure enough, they caught him. Somebody rushed over there, apprehended the guy, and then the whole story came out. Pretty crazy. Fascinating book. You should check it out.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, with the winters are so harsh, I can't imagine what someone would do out in the wild. And supposedly, the one thing I did hear is that he didn't use campfire.
That's right. Never once.
That is just crazy. Amazing.
He said he would get warm just by pacing around and layering up the best he could, and making forts, if you will, just to try to stop the wind and
lean-tos, as they say.
Right.
So our phone line is still open. That number's up on the screen. I'll ask Evan to type it over in KGRA chat room over there. So anyone wants to call in, you're welcome to call in.
Any homies listening, you should call in.
Yeah, anyone from Maine, or even if you're from the Northeast, if you'd like to call in, if you had an incident. We did have a couple calls from New Hampshire, I believe, a while back. So if you're listening tonight, love to hear from you.
Yeah, give a call. Hey, Martin, do you mind if I talk about a couple other things I got going on?
Yeah, go right ahead, sure.
So I have a podcast of my own.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
it's called I Want to Believe, the podcast. And you can find it on iTunes. You can find it actually anywhere podcasts are found except for Spotify. And Spotify are a bunch of jerks. So, but yeah, you can find it on iTunes, Podbean, all that good stuff. So I Want to Believe. You can search for it by name, or you can search for it by my name, Nomar Slevik. And it's me and a buddy that talk about specific cases, really. We talk about the Dyatlov Pass, we talk about the Dover Demon, and we talk about a bunch of different things, UFOs. I had Valerie Schultz on. I've also interviewed, I'm a big horror movie fan, so I also interviewed Damien Maffei. He played the man in the mask in The Strangers Pray at Night, and who actually lives in Portland, Maine. And I email, so I'm a musician, so I've emailed some musician buddies like Spose and Brzezowski and Hobbs Sputnik or Hobbs Stay Busy. So it's quite an eclectic catch of things. And we do it a little bit different. I'm not really sure how you guys really handle like the live thing. I don't need that pressure in my life. So we pre-record everything. And we actually pre-record all the shows, and then we release it as seasons, kind of like Netflix style.
Huh.
And then it's peppered with some contemporary bonus episodes.
Interesting.
So,
okay,
yeah,
you have a
yeah,
website. You can just go out and throw the website out.
Geez, it's just you want to like go to iTunes and just search for I Want to Believe.
Okay, so it
yeah,
just lives out
no
there.
website. This is definitely DIY at its finest. Being an author, if you're not Stephen King, money's tight. So we do what we can. There is a Patreon page if you want to support us. So there's that. Also, I'm working on a documentary with Bill Brock. Bill Brock was the host of a Discovery Channel show called Monsters Underground. And he's in the process of doing a series of 3 documentaries for this year and the beginning of next year. And the first one is called Abducted New England. So I brought a couple of witnesses to the case, and then another one of our friends brought another witness, and we had interviews, and right now it's currently being edited, and we're hope that it's going to be out by the end of the summer, and it should be exclusively available on VidiSpace. VidiSpace is a channel that was started by Nick Groff. Nick Groff used to be on Ghost Adventures and is now on Paranormal Lockdown and has a couple other shows that he does. And so he's launched this channel, and they have the exclusive rights for a little bit. We are going to be putting it on DVD as well. I'm also working on a documentary of my own. So the documentary with Bill Brock and I'm the writer-producer, and he's the director. On this new documentary, I'm the director and writer. So it's a fantastic, crazy story of this couple from southern Maine that have had extraterrestrial encounters since childhood, and they finally want their story told and to get out there. So preliminary shooting is going to begin in August, and I hope to have everything filmed by the end of fall, and then I'm going to edit everything during the winter, and hopefully come spring I'll have something to release to everybody.
Interesting. Well, great. Okay, well, good luck with all that. Hope it goes well
Thanks.
for you. You just brought up Stephen King. So Stephen King lives in your town, Bangor, Maine.
That's right. And I drive by his house often.
If anyone drives by his mansion, he's got bats on the posts. I had a friend that lived in Bangor, and he told me that one morning he drove by and the bats were missing. Someone came along and sawed them all off and took them. And he said by nighttime, he drove by again on the way home, and the bats were up again. So he has some spare bats ready to weld on at any given time. So Stephen King wrote an interesting book. I remember reading it called The Tommyknockers.
Yeah.
And that's actually about a alien spacecraft that's below an ancient alien spacecraft that's below the ground in this little Maine town. And all these weird things start happening. All these people start acting weird. It starts to activate. I believe that's what it was. I read that many, many years ago. Back in the 80s, I think I read that. So Stephen King would be someone really interesting to have on your show, wouldn't he?
He really would. Yeah. And there has been a bit of an effort to try to talk to him. The story that I told you about, Shots Fired, where the guy fired at the UFO, the gentleman's name is John King, and I've been trying to see if I can get a comment or something from Stephen to see if there's any sort of relation, if he's ever familiar with that story, you know?
Well, you never know how to break the ice with someone. So let's talk about another story. You mentioned the one about missing time, but just there's so many in here that are just interesting. How about the tale of two brothers?
And the TR3B?
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy about the TR3B.
Yeah.
You know, whether it exists or not, and I think for the most part, it's kind of been debunked that it exists. But these people were claiming they saw something like that.
Yeah, they're claiming they saw a triangle aircraft of some sort, and this happened in the late 70s. They were out eel fishing at night, and I actually brought the TR3B name into the chapter. They simply talked about seeing a large triangle with, you know, these white and red lights and things like that. So I was merely trying to compare it to what a lot of UFO conspiracy theorists, something that I don't think myself to be, or have kind of come out and said that anytime there's a triangle UFO seen, it's one of these TR3Bs. The Belgian wave that happened in the late 90s was all attributed to the TR3B, blah, 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 blah. And so I just made the comparison that the TR3B has been brought up in relation to this story of what these guys saw. And it really gained momentum with the Richard Kramer case, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but he claims to be somebody who was part of a galactic space force, which kind of sounds funny now that Trump said that he wants to make a space force, but that he was part of this galactic space force that trained on Mars. And the way they got there from Earth was the TR3B. So it's gained a lot of momentum from that, and it's just not something that I buy into. I you know what? I guess I do put my opinion in that one too, just specifically about the TR3B, but not the guy's story. But the guy's story is as simple as that. They're eel fishing. They hear this whooshing sound above them. They look up and they see this giant, very low, very slow flying black triangle. And of course, they're mesmerized by it, and then it just, takes off in an instant.
Now, are there a lot of triangle UFO sightings in the Northeast that you're aware of?
There are, yes.
And any others make your book?
Yes, one did. There's a chapter that's about viral videos from Maine, where I called them from mostly YouTube, but there's a few other websites as well. But there's one story out of Westbrook, Maine.
That's not too far from me. That's only about 25 minutes from where I live in Sebago.
Oh boy, hold on. There is a Westbrook sighting, but the one I'm thinking about is Rockland. I'm so sorry.
Okay, that's along the coast.
Yeah,
and it's a beautiful area up along the coast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's probably, a half hour, maybe 40 minutes from Camden, where the Mothman
That's right.
thing happened. But this was some lights that were caught on video in 2015. And it is 3 lights that are lined up as a triangle. And you can see them very clear as day, floating in unison across the sky. And this video went viral. This guy has been bothered. And I actually reached out to him. His name's Tyler Pendleton, and we did talk via Facebook Messenger. He didn't want to meet in person, nor did he want to give me any current quotes from our conversation together. So the best thing I could do is just write about the story that already existed. But I did talk to the gentleman, and he's convinced that what he saw was otherworldly in nature. What's interesting is that there's the director of the Astronomy Center at the University of Maine in Orono. His name's Scott Mitchell, and he said he viewed the video, and he said there could be any number of explanations. Just the weather here on Earth can get kind of crazy. If you look at this is not any sort of weather phenomenon. So in my opinion, it's ludicrous that he even offers that as an explanation. But if you want to find this story, you can do a search for UFO triangle, coastal Maine on YouTube. UFO triangle, coastal Maine. And you can search for that specifically in YouTube and find the video.
Now, I remember a while back, I was curious about Maine UFOs on YouTube, so I was living in Cape Elizabeth, and
nice.
there was actually my neighbor actually saw a triangle UFO during my show. I've talked about this a number of times. And anyway, so I was curious, and I looked on YouTube, and I found Cape Elizabeth Fort Williams Park, which is a place I still go a lot, walk around there.
Yeah.
And
Fort Williams, great.
it's very, very obvious from the video when you're watching it that it's a kite. And I forget how many views it has, and people are flying kites there all the time. So
Yeah.
it's definitely
That's
a kite.
funny.
It's because it's like, they say something like it's hovering. Yes, of
boy.
course a kite hovers.
I also want to point out that in the book, I also chronicle my own investigations to some of these encounters. So you'll see in some of the chapters that I'm talking about meeting the witness, talking to them, and then I actually go on site and conduct my own investigation. And they're kind of riddled with like hilarity and strangeness, and it's just kind of fun. You know, we're in this age of documenting everything, so I did that in the written form, so you get a complete behind the scenes and me talking about like driving there and what podcasts I'm downloading to listen to and stuff like that. I'm trying to paint a picture, you know, and in my opinion, I really think what comes across is the genuineness in which I'm trying to convey these stories, if that makes sense, you know. So I just wanted to point that out. Like there's a lot involved, and I work very hard, you know.
Yeah, well, I think it's always a good idea to, put in the surrounding story. It just
Sure.
adds a little bit to it. You know, there's much more than just a plain interview, and which I find.
And this publisher was much more open to that as opposed to my last publisher. That one was kind of like, here's a starter guide to UFOs in Maine. And I really wanted to sink my teeth in and tell a different type of story in this book. And you'll see that it's much more detailed.
Excellent. Well,
and it was encouraged.
I can't believe it. We're at the end of the show.
Wow.
As far as I know, that went pretty fast. So thank you so much. And anyone can get this book. Check it out. It's Otherworldly Encounters and Evidence of UFO Sightings and Abductions. And that's over on Amazon and other places you can find books.
That's right. It's available wherever books are sold. Check out my podcast, I Want to Believe, and Abducted in New England documentary coming soon.
Excellent. Good luck with that. Hope that goes well.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot. And you take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right, everyone. So our show next week, we have Kevin Randall on, and he's got some things to talk about. It's been a while. He had his own radio show for a while, but it's been a while since he's been, on the airwaves. So it'll be interesting. Actually, this is I think the first post December 16th when the New York Times article came out. First one that I believe he wants to talk about that a little bit. So Kevin Randall next week. I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show. Evan, of course, that is helping with the YouTube. Race over at KGRA Radio. Our guest, of course, Nomar Slevik. Don't forget to check out his book online. And so that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky. And we'll see you next week.